Hello everyone, and welcome to Winshuttle Transaction Advanced I training. I am Miia from ADSOTECH, your Winchell partner in the Nordics, and I'm here to guide you through our three training packages: Basic, Advanced I, and Advanced II. These packages are designed for new Winchell transaction users with a developer license. We are now in the Advanced I training package, which includes multi-line recordings, reading from SAP, script linking, taking backups, and data validation. This is the second part of that package, and we will concentrate on the download functionality of Winchell transaction. That is getting data from SAP to Excel. Let's dive in. Even if we talk about reading from SAP with Winchell transaction, we're not changing the fundamentals of Winchell transaction. We're always creating a script that goes into a specific SAP transaction, but within that transaction, we can either update data to SAP or we can extract data from SAP without any complex queries. Now, when we talk about reading from SAP, we can also use read-only fields. So not just the updatable fields, but also read-only fields. In most cases, the read-only fields, if we choose to use them, will need some extra clicks once we are in the mapping phase. But that's just because they're read-only and we are not able to use our keyboard in those fields when we record. In fact, if we are trying to create a script that will only do reading from SAP, no updates going to SAP, we can in fact use an SAP T code that only has the display functionality in it. Transactions like MM03, which is display material, for instance. In some scenarios, we want to do both in one script. So we want to do some reading from SAP to Excel, but at the same time, we want to do some updates to SAP as well. That's possible. Of course, it needs to be done in a transaction that updates are possible. So for instance, MM02. If we look at more complex situations, then we might be talking about two different scripts. So reading data from SAP to Excel with one script, and then using another separate script to actually upload data to SAP. In this instance, since we're talking about two different scripts, the execution conditions of the second script, so the uploading of data, can depend on the downloaded data. Because by the time we start uploading data to SAP, the first script has already run and we have the data in Excel. If we put both data directions into one script, the data that gets read from SAP to Excel doesn't get to Excel before we start doing the uploads to SAP, so we cannot base any conditions on that downloaded data. What the reading might look like in the mapper. Which way the data goes is a matter of the mapping type. Normally we do our drag and drop from Excel to SAP, so we get icons Excel and SAP and an arrow pointing from Excel to SAP, like you see here on row 1, for instance. But if you look at rows 3 and 8 here, you will notice that the icons are in different direction. So SAP icon is on the left, there's an arrow pointing to the right to the Excel icon. Those specific fields here have been mapped so that we start dragging from the SAP field and drag to the Excel column. That's why we'll get these icons. Over in Excel, it could look something like this. So this is, again, just one script that has data going in both directions. Over in this Excel file, we have used Winchell's default headers on row 1. And from those default headers, we can tell that columns A to D have been mapped from Excel to SAP, and columns E and F have been mapped to read from SAP to Excel. We know this from the headers because of the header colors. So columns A to D, the header has background color of blue, and in columns E and F the background color is purplish. You don't have to use the Winchell default headers, not the colors, not the texts. But if you do, then the color should tell you the direction of the data flow. But you feel free to change the headers and the colors to whatever you want. You can do that manually in Excel. Let's create a script for this. Just a simple script where we will only be reading data from SAP to Excel. I could create a script like the ones we have done before, our first script that we created together and things like that. So an MM02, very simple MM02 script. In this case, we would just map it in the other direction to get the data from SAP to Excel instead of uploading it to SAP. But what I would like to show to you is how to use transaction MM03 to create a similar script. If I were to create a script with MM02 just for reading, the recording portion would be exactly the same as we have seen in our basic training package when we were creating our very first script. So there's no difference there. We just go to that transaction and we use our keyboard in those fields that we want to have in our script, and then we can, when we get to the mapper, we can simply map in the other direction. But I thought I would walk you through using MM03 since I'm only interested in creating a script that reads data from SAP to Excel and no updates will be happening. So I can use MM03. The difference now when I record will be that all of my fields will be read-only. They will all be grayed out and I cannot use my keyboard in any of them. First of all, in order to read from SAP to Excel, I have to consider my recording modes. Batch mode is not able to read, so we're not going to be using that. We will be using non-batch input mode. Without SAP controls is fine for us now. As it says here, read from SAP. So recommended for features such as read from SAP. So we will use this one, not batch input mode. Now we have the SAP window. In order to get into the actual transaction windows, I will have to give a material number. But after this point, the following SAP fields are grayed out. And since these fields are all grayed out, I cannot simply put my cursor in one of the fields and start using my keyboard, which I would normally do. But I can't do that right now. Instead, what I will do is that I'll navigate through those tabs where I have the data that I want to have in my script. This is one of those tabs, so I simply come here. I will navigate to the next tab, Basic Data 2. There's something there as well that I want to have in my script. Great. I don't have a third tab that I want to have in my script, so I'm happy with this. But since this is one of those tabs that I want to have in my script, or this tab has some data that I want to have in my script, I will not simply exit from here. I will do another navigation. In this case, very simple navigation, just to go back to Basic Data 1. Point with the navigation is that even though I don't touch any of the fields, Winchell will take a copy of most of those fields and record them in the background. Meaning that if I dig deep enough in my script, in the mapper, I will actually find all of these untouched fields as well. Because Winchell has noticed most of these fields, taken a copy, and they will be there inside my script. But they're not active parts of the script, so I don't see them immediately when I get to the mapper. I have to dig deeper. And coming back to this navigation, so I was first in Basic Data 1, navigating to Basic Data 2, navigating back to Basic Data 1. The reason why I don't want to exit directly from Basic Data 2 is that Winchell does not recognize or take a copy of those fields on the last screen in the recording. If I would exit directly from Basic Data 2, then that would be the last screen in my recording, and those fields would not get picked up. Instead, I navigate back to Basic Data 1, where I actually already was previously, so those fields have been picked up already. Now Basic Data 2 fields have been picked up as well. I'm back in Basic Data 1 and I can exit. Either using the back button or the exit button, both are just fine. Let's use exit. Alright, back with Winchell. Create mapping. Empty Excel on the bottom, and the recorded SAP fields listed here. But now that I was unable to use my keyboard in most of the fields, only material number was typed in, so I don't see the fields that I want to have in my script. What I need to do is go to Expert View, where I get a bigger list. Again, there are no fields, but I have all the navigations, different actions that I took while recording. Now if I go behind Filters button here, I can see that there's one filter on, Hide All Disabled Fields. Well, disabled fields is exactly what I want to see right now. So I will take that filter off, and we'll get a much longer list here. Now I can start looking through my script. You notice that the list is much longer because there are a lot of fields listed that don't have the tick box ticked on. And that's the whole point. I want to find my fields, the ones that I'm looking for. I want to find those and tick them on. So here's my initial screen where I give my material number. Then there's the list of views that I need to select from. That's fine as well. We'll move on to the next one, because the next one should be Basic Data 1. So from there I would like to find a couple of fields. Okay, it ends already there, so let's look at here. Material number I already have. Material description that I want. I also want the weights, gross weight, weight unit, and net weight. And I think that's enough for me in that screen. They're ticked on now. I'm happy with that. Let's move on to the next screen, which should be Basic Data 2. Over here in Basic Data 2, I am missing the field descriptions, unfortunately, right now. That's probably due to some small issue that occurred in the exchange dialog between Winchell and SAP. So something wrong with my internet connection. That's fine. I just happen to remember that this Mara WRKST is the basic material field which I want to have. You can check these technical field names in SAP if you need to. I just happen to remember this particular field name, so it's that one. Now I think I have enabled all the fields that I wanted to. So to make my life much easier, I will put the filter back on, hide all disabled fields. And now, since I enabled some of these fields, I actually see gross weight, net weight, and weight unit here, material description as well. And then there's this basic material that doesn't have the field description right now. If I want, I can add the field description myself. It's as simple as that. It doesn't matter if it's exactly the same that SAP has for this particular field, because Winshuttle is when Winchell converses with SAP, it's using these field names, these technical field names. Those need to be exactly correct, so to the letter. But the descriptions, not that important. Winchell doesn't really use them for anything. It's more for us as users. Now that I've enabled all the fields that I wanted, I can simply do my drag and drop like I would if I had done this script in MM02 and I was able to type in my data or use my keyboard in those fields. So it's about dragging and dropping. Dragging my material number from A to material number, and then the rest I can drag in the other direction. Now you might ask, why did I drag and drop material number from Excel to SAP? Think about it. When this script is run, we always go to MM03 transaction in SAP. What happens in the beginning of that transaction? We get the initial screen where we are asked for a material number. If we don't put a material number to SAP at that point, we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to get to the following screen. So we're not going to see the data for that material number. If you think about it like that, it should be quite logical. That material number is a field that we always need to map from Excel to SAP, and then the rest that follows we can map from SAP to Excel, if that's what we choose to do. There could be some other fields in the beginning or in the middle of the script that need to be mapped from Excel to SAP. That depends entirely on the transaction and the navigations and the process that you are recording. For instance, if we're still talking about materials, if you start going to views and tabs like sales organization data and things like this, then you will most likely see a pop-up that's asking for company code or sales organization number and things like this. If you don't give those, then if you don't give those to SAP, then you're not going to be followed through to the following screen, which means that you don't see the data and then you can't pick that data up either. So think about the process that happens in SAP, and based on that, it should be fairly simple to know which pieces of data need to be mapped from Excel to SAP and which can be mapped SAP to Excel. I'm happy with my mapping for now, so I will close that and of course save my files. Let's take a look at the Excel file that we just created. I have one material number and I have some nonsense characters here in my following columns. What I would like to have is a few more material numbers. Remember, this is always going from Excel to SAP, so I actually have to have the material numbers here. But since I have the material numbers here, now I'm able to fetch data for those material numbers, specifically material description, basic material, weight unit, gross weight, and net weight. Now, whether I leave these nonsense characters here or not doesn't play any role in this process. Columns B to F have been reserved for this data in the script. So whenever I start running the script, Winchell will take the current data from SAP and print it in these columns on the respective rows. It doesn't matter what is already there for those rows and for those cells, it will always be overwritten anyway. So I can leave everything blank. I can blank these out as well, or I can have whatever data here in any of these cells. That's fine. I could have data here, and I could have data here as well. Doesn't matter to the script. Let's save that and run the script to see what happens. And here we are. We have data in Excel. Whatever we had here in these cells previously, so columns B to F and rows 2 to 7. Doesn't matter what we had there before, it gets overwritten. If for some reason basic material was empty, it was an empty value in SAP for some of these materials, then we would actually get an empty value here as well. I also had some data here in D19 and also here in N5. Those do not get overwritten because those columns and rows were not touched by the script at this point. I only had material numbers on rows 2 to 7, so any rows after that will not be affected. And also I only have data until column F, or mappings in the script I only have until G, considering the log column. So anything in columns after that will not be affected at all. You might be wondering about the log message. Again, if we think about what we expect to happen in SAP, we go to transaction MM03, we give a material number, and then we just navigate through different tabs so we can fetch data. So we take a copy of the data that we need and we want to print it in Excel. But that's it. We're not doing any changes. We're actually not really trying to do anything in SAP. All we want to do is see the data so we can copy paste it to Excel. And therefore, there's no real message that SAP could provide us with. Unless there's some kind of error situation, we're not really getting any sensible messages back from SAP. And therefore, we get no message returned from SAP. As long as we see some data coming back from SAP, we're fine. So the message is, it's okay to say no message is returned from SAP. We're not trying to do any updates, so we're not really expecting a message to come back from SAP. What we expect to happen is to get the data, and that we got. So we're happy with that. And that concludes the second part of our Advanced 1 package for Winchell transaction. So far we know how to use loops and read data from SAP to Excel. Please join me in the next part, which will cover how to link scripts together and run a chain of SAP actions. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining.